Welcome back to the Ben Mulroney Show, and it's time for our midweek panel, This Week in Politics. And you know, I like to say that we find our listeners wherever they are. Well, we also find our guests wherever they are, because we've got a number of guests joining us right now. Dimitris Soudas, he's the former Director of Communications for Prime Minister Stephen Harper, as well as Tom Parkin, Principal at Impact Strategies and Canadian columnist and commentator, as well as Warren Kinsella, and CEO. He's the CEO of the Daisy Group, and we find him in his car. To all three of you, I say welcome to the show.
Hi there.
All right, gentlemen, I want to start with the First Minister's Conference because, we got to take these ministers at their word. I was wondering how it was going to go and how well the Prime Minister was going to acquit himself amongst the provincial leaders. Here is what Doug Ford said about how well the meeting went.
Let me tell you, I'm going to be very blunt here. This has been the best meeting we've had in 10 years. Simple. Best meeting I've had in 7 years. And there was no expectations that the Prime Minister was going to come out and say, you get that project, you get that project. It was a great discussion. Now, yes. We were all talking. Now it's time to put it into action. All of us are responsible. But I thought it was an incredible meeting, great communication, great collaboration, and we all walked out of that room united.
And I believe the Ontario Premier also called the Prime Minister Santa Claus. So is this just Doug Ford being Doug Ford, or has Mark Carney genuinely been impressive this early on the job? Warren, I'll start with you.
Mark Carney, get out your checkbook. When the premiers are being that complimentary, they don't just do that for donuts. They're doing that for a reason. So I presume that Mr. Carney indicated to them a loosening of the federal purse strings for whatever reason, a more liberalized interprovincial trade, a more unanimous front on tariffs and Trump. I don't know what motivation was. I wasn't in the room. I guess none of us were. But that's some of the most positive stuff I've heard coming out of a provincial premier's mouth about a prime minister in a long, long time. And there's usually a price tag attached to it.
Dimitris Soudas, these premiers represent all political stripes with different agendas and different priorities and different asks. So for Doug Ford to come out and make that statement, what does it say to you?
Tens of billions of dollars are about to flow.
Okay.
That's what it says. And, yesterday, 9 out of 10 premiers were there. BC Premier Ebby was not. I gather he was on a trade mission somewhere in Asia. But listen, Warren has attended many federal, provincial meetings between premiers and the Prime Minister, as I have. One thing that Prime Ministers avoid like the plague is meeting the premiers. Why? Because every time they ask for more money. And what Mark Carney's trying to do, though, what he's trying to do is to get buy-in from the premiers on the legislation that he's going to be tabling in the next few days or as late as next week, which would basically change the rules to be able to fast track and to be able to get some big projects going, whether it's natural resources, energy, mining, and so on. But when a premier calls the Prime Minister Santa Claus, you have to worry, because premiers are seldom and rarely ever content with what the federal government's going to give them.
Tom Parkin, are you going to make this unanimous?
Yeah, but let's add one more dimension on here, is that we really don't know what's being talked about. Right. It's very vague, very general, and for those of us in the, just observing from the outside, and I suspect even from those in the room, there are maybe hopes about what's being talked about, but there's really nothing being talked about. There are national interest projects being talked about, and every premier has forwarded a list of them. Doug Ford thinks that tunneling under the 401 is a national interest project. I don't see it. I think it's maybe a local fantasy, but it's not a national interest project. So what are we even talking about here?
Well, I'm glad you said that, Tom.
It does seem like a big poker table, and we haven't seen all the players yet.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that dovetails into our next topic. And I'll come to you first on this, Tom. But here's what Mark Carney talked about. He laid out the criteria for fast-tracking infrastructure projects. Let's listen to some of the details.
We had wide-ranging discussions. There was a lot of preparation for this meeting. We discussed a wide range of potential nation-building projects, including, and this is far from exhaustive, the Western and Arctic Corridor, which, amongst other things, connects energy, critical minerals, and trade infrastructure, the Eastern Energy Partnership, critical minerals pathways, which include a range of critical mineral projects that premiers can speak to, the next stage of nuclear from uranium to SMRs to large-scale nuclear, and a series of infrastructure investments for export diversification from ports to rails to last-mile roads.
So he mentioned a lot of things, and look, but he didn't mention pipelines, Tom. Now, this is not a discussion about whether or not you think we should be building pipelines. This is a discussion about the fact that this is a man who is very precise in his language, and for him not to say something is as significant as if he were to say it. So, so what do you make of that?
Yeah, he did later, under questioning from a reporter, talk about, because the reporter was very blunt. What are you talking about here in terms of the infrastructure as it relates to pipelines? And he did give the answer of, well, yes, I'm talking about pipelines. I'm talking about decarbonized bitumen pipelines. I'm like, what's a decarbonized bitumen?
Yeah.
So, you know, it's like the more mysterious it gets as you fall into it a little bit more. So, you know, we also heard Daniel Smith the other day say that if the timelines are shortened, the approval processes are shortened or attenuated, then a proponent of pipelines will come forward, which is a bit of the mystery in this whole darn thing.
Yeah, and Tom,
who's paying for this stuff, right? Is it going to be private sector partners, or is it going to be the taxpayer?
And that's what I don't understand, Warren, is, you know, when he references SMRs, he just references SMRs, but for some reason when it comes to pipelines, there's all these he wordsmiths his way into, I don't know, creating loopholes. I struggle to understand the exceptionalism of pipelines, given how they've dominated our public consciousness and conversations for so long.
Well, the political reality, and all of us know it, is pipelines are unpopular in the province of Quebec. The province of Quebec derives its energy from hydro, and so the preoccupation with pipeline energy that comes via a pipeline, is just not there. And so that's a political reality every prime minister needs to deal with. But I'm guessing, like, I don't know for sure what it is, because you guys are right. He is equivocating on the issue. And I find it bizarre, because the one thing that was clear coming out of this election was, you know, everybody has moderated their position on pipelines, including the NDP and the Liberals, and are much more willing to entertain the discussion. So is Premier Legault.
Yeah, well, I want to bring Dimitris into this, because Dimitris knows Quebec very well, and it does. You're right, Warren. That but the polling that I saw it was a few weeks ago, but we finally had a plurality of Quebecers who were willing to have a conversation and entertain the notion of pipelines going through their territory. So I'll put the question to you, Dimitris. What do you make of the equivocation?
So the equivocation, as far as I'm concerned, is that when he refuses or tries to avoid to use the word pipeline, he's actually speaking to the caucus that he inherited. A Trudeau caucus that basically put up every single barrier you can imagine to ensure that oil and gas stay in the ground. So he's got some challenges. How much longer is Stephen Guilbeault going to tolerate this for? He is the minister who brought in the carbon tax. He's the minister who brought in a cap on natural resource production. So in terms of pipelines, and I do want to go back to the issue of Quebec, and Warren is quite right when he says that there's reluctance on pipelines in Quebec. Now, we have two types of pipelines. Pipelines that can bring natural gas to Sept-Îles, for example. You're very familiar with Sept-Îles, Ben.
Yes, indeed. By the way, I'm going to need you to tighten up. I need you to finish up in about 20 seconds.
Okay, so long story short, there's a path to having a pipeline with natural gas into Quebec. The pathway for oil will probably go through Manitoba into Hudson's Bay.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you very much for that. And I'm sure we'll be talking about more about that in the future. After the break with my panel, we're going to talk about something I haven't seen in a very long time, a Liberal government losing a vote in the House of Commons. Don't go anywhere. This is the Ben Mulroney Show. Welcome back to the Ben Mulroney Show, and very pleased to continue my conversation with my midweek This Week in Politics panel. And we've got Dimitris, we've got Warren, and on camera now we've got Tom. To the three of you, I say welcome back. Thanks so much for sticking around.
Hey there.
Yeah, I want to talk about, and Dimitris, I'll come to you first. I want to talk about the Air Canada's first ever 2S LGBTQIA plus flight, where everyone on board that was working for Air Canada was a member of that community. They posted it to social media. It was a moment of pride for them. And they got a lot of pushback on social media to the point they had to turn off their comments. It reminded me, maybe unfairly, and you'll let me know, of Bud Light's hiring of a trans influencer to help them sell beer, and they promptly saw their sales drop. And like, to me, we live in a world where if you're a gay pilot, you can work anywhere. I struggle to see the achievement of excluding anybody else from the flight. And I don't know. It just feels like we've moved past these things. What do you think?
Well, there's the question of gender identity, and sexual orientation. My question behind such campaigns is, to what end? Hire people regardless of their sexual orientation, hire people regardless of their gender identity, hire people because they are good, because they excel. Meritocracy. I don't know what purpose it serves to do this. It probably creates more of a gap rather than to actually bridge the gap on issues like this.
And Tom, I'll bring you in next, because look, it's not like they hired all these people due to some initiative. All these people already worked for the company. Therein lies the accomplishment. So everything else is, if to me, feels like performance for performance sake. I mean, these guys are pilots that rose the ranks of Air Canada. These are flight attendants with tenure, and they've been experienced. Like, so I don't know the point of this at this point. I feel like we as a society are past this, but I'm speaking from my perspective, obviously.
Well, I didn't look at the comments. I bet you there were some pretty horrific ones.
Of course.
Let's be honest about that. Some pretty disgusting comments. Now, having said that, I understand there were also people who who are gay and said, like, this is Air Canada's kind of a crummy company that charges you a lot of money just to take a bag on the plane now. And they're trying to shine their image on me.
Yeah.
So that's kind of annoying.
Yeah.
And then there's kind of just a second part to this. So there's the horrific, there's the performative, and then there's a third little piece, which is really about the kind of the center left audience, the progressives, which is the language that the left uses to talk about opposing racism, opposing hate, is really alienating, to use another alienating word. It comes from so outside the mainstream that it disconnects from people's everyday experience, and it pushes back the cause that it's trying to espouse, which I believe, except for those horrific people, most of us want a Canada where everybody gets to succeed on their merits, and nobody has to face discrimination in a job, in a school, or anywhere.
Yeah, and Warren, I think, Warren, I think that's where we were. I think that I thought that's where we were, because, like I said, all these guys already worked for Air Canada.
I think whenever issues like this come up for me, I always remind myself of what the definition is of woke, because woke is kind of the general term that gets applied to these types of situations. And woke means being alert or aware of prejudice and discrimination and, expressions of bigotry. And all of us, Tom and Dimitri and you, all of us, by that definition, are woke. The reason why I think the forces of wokedom got into trouble is not because they were aware of prejudice and concerned about prejudice, but because they were preachy about it and pious and condescending to people. and impatient with people. And then in instances where they found opposition or disagreement, they sought to cancel people. And that's why an extreme manifestation of that side of the argument is, the MAGA Donald Trump stuff, where they ran a campaign very successfully against this type of approach.
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong being aware of prejudice, nothing wrong with being against prejudice. That's what you should be. It's just, being preachy about it and pious about it. That's what turns people off.
Well, we're going to end this conversation with something I just didn't see in the last parliament in any significant way. The Liberals suffered their first loss of the new parliament on Monday after a Conservative amendment to the throne speech narrowly passed. So the amendment called for a firm commitment from the government to introduce an economic update or budget before the House rises for the traditional summer break. And it passed 166 to 164. There were 4 Liberal MPs who weren't there to cast their vote. Is this significant? I'll start with you, Dimitris. Is it significant or just an embarrassment to Mark Carney?
Well, it's both. Honestly, the responsibility lies with the whip of the government, who's Mark Marrison, which, by the way, many Liberal MPs tell me that that's probably the MP they dislike the most. If this guy does not learn how to count and learn to count quickly, we may end up in a Joe Clark situation. Because if you lose a vote on an issue of confidence because you don't know how to count, because you haven't lined up your MPs, boy, you're in trouble. So this is strike number 1 for Mr. Marrison. Yeah. I'm not sure Mark Carney gives people more than 2 strikes, so he better get it right the next time.
Yeah, Warren, something tells me this wouldn't have happened under your old boss.
No, it's Mark Garrettson, by the way. I understand why Dimitri wants to blank out his name in his mind, because Mark Garrettson is truly the worst member of Parliament, without qualification. And I was blown away when they gave this guy some kind of responsibility in the House. So I'm not surprised in the slightest that this happened, but it is significant because it's about the budget. Yeah. And they don't have the budget ready. Frankie Bubbles, Minister Champagne, made that clear. They weren't going to have the budget ready for months. So, I don't know if they revote this. I'm not sure what the procedure is, but it's definitely an embarrassment. It's a bit of a black eye, and the guy who wears it is Mark Garrettson. Yeah.
And Tom, I got to say that what a difference a few months are, because the NDP that were in the House of Commons, they all voted against the Liberals on this. So is this a sign that the love-in between Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh, those are long gone days?
They are long gone. Long gone. I think to see the NDP move it to a more purely opposition perspective. And there's also an accountability issue here. I mean, at first, Mr. Carney said we weren't even going to have a budget this year, which was kind of like, we're just going to have an economic statement, that would be it. And then he backpedaled and said, we'll have a budget, but we'll have one in the fall.
Yeah, well, the final day of fall, just so everybody remembers, is December 20th.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a significant issue, and that is offensive to Parliament. And this is a tweet back at the government, Mr. Carney, that don't be so high-handed. I know you didn't get elected before you became premier, and maybe you think, all your life has been a dream, but you're not the executive vice president of Brookfield anymore, the executive chairman. You're the prime minister, and you're accountable to Parliament.
Well, I tell you, when I saw this news today, I just didn't expect it. It kind of hit me in the face because I was so used to the Liberal governments finding a way to get their votes passed as a matter of course. And so for a first couple of weeks in the House of Commons, not necessarily the best start for them. Hey, to all 3 of you, to Dimitris, Soudas, to Tom Parkin, to Warren Kinsella, thank you so much for joining me. I mean, if this is a taste of what we can expect over the next Parliament, it's going to be a doozy. I'm going to be relying on you guys for your assessment of the facts on the ground. So thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks guys.
And I want to thank you as well for joining us here on the show. It's been a heck of a fun show to do. And if you want to keep the conversation going, you know what to do. Just follow me. Well, some people call it Twitter. Other people call it X. I call myself at Ben Mulroney. That's where you can find me. We can keep the conversation going there. And of course, we'll be posting the podcast. For those of you who've missed parts of the show, we'll be posting to YouTube as well, so you can find us there. I want to thank you so much for spending part of your Tuesday with us. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you right back here on Wednesday. Thanks so much for watching the show. Now, if you enjoyed what you saw, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another episode of The Ben Mulroney Show.